On October 6, 1973, a profound quiet fell over the nation of Israel. It was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Families gathered in synagogues, streets were empty. The country observed a day of fasting and prayer. But this sacred silence was about to be shattered by the thunder of war. In a coordinated assault that defied predictions, Egypt launched a massive surprise attack. Simultaneously, Syria launched a massive surprise attack. Along the Suez Canal, thousands of Egyptian soldiers swarmed across the waterway, breaching the Bar-Lev line with water cannons. A feat many Israeli commanders had believed was impossible. In the north, Syrian tanks rolled across the ceasefire lines, threatening to cut Israel in two. Israel's defenders, caught off guard and outnumbered, were quickly overwhelmed. A stunning reversal of fortune. Arab crowds celebrated, a powerful statement that the Arab world would no longer accept the status quo. The world watched as the tide seemed to turn, and the conflict threatened to draw in the superpowers. The attack was a masterclass in planning and deception, and the Middle East's fragile order had been thrown into chaos. In the chaotic days after the surprise attack, a single question echoed through Tel Aviv: how did this happen? Israel's intelligence agencies, especially Mossad, were famed for their reach and effectiveness. Yet on Yom Kippur, that shield seemed to have failed. A humbling moment that revealed intelligence systems can be fallible. But intelligence is a game of shadows and whispers. The story is more complex than a single catastrophic lapse. Long before the first shots, Mossad had been engaged in a silent war across the Middle East, cultivating sources and networks. This intricate web of espionage was meant to provide early warning to Israel's leaders. Israeli intelligence had received warnings, massive exercises, troop movements, supply convoys, but a filter of assumptions distorted interpretation. A prevailing belief, the concepcia, suggested Egypt would not attack without deep strike capability. Many indicators were dismissed as posturing. Yet the networks Mossad had built for years would prove crucial once the initial shock passed. Field reports and captured documents helped commanders anticipate movements, identify supply lines, and target vulnerabilities. That intelligence enabled the counterattacks that would, over time, turn the tide of the war. The invisible shield had been dented, not broken, and Israel's deeper networks became a decisive factor as the fighting evolved. To understand Israel's intelligence depth, we must look back to the spies who laid groundwork years earlier. Perhaps no story is more legendary than Eli Cohen, operating in Syria in the early 1960s. Under the alias Kamal Amin Thabet, he posed as a wealthy businessman and ingratiated himself with Syrian elites. With charm and craft, he cultivated friendships at the highest levels of Syrian society. From an apartment overlooking a central square, Cohen transmitted detailed information on Syrian plans and defenses. In one famous example, advice to plant eucalyptus trees unwittingly marked Syrian fortifications for Israeli reconnaissance. That intelligence proved decisive in 1967, and its psychological map of the Syrian military remained relevant in 1973. Cohen's reports shaped defensive strategies for years, giving Israeli commanders familiarity with Syrian terrain and thinking. Though discovered and executed in 1965, Cohen's sacrifice had a long afterlife in Israel's strategic memory. When Syrian tanks poured into the Golan in 1973, defenders fought on ground made familiar by those secret maps. Eli Cohen's story is a reminder that wars are fought not only with tanks and planes, but with information and courage. His legacy provided a hidden advantage that helped Israel survive its darkest hour. After crossing the Suez, the Egyptian army had momentum on its side. The path into the Sinai seemed open. Their early success was dramatic and symbolic. Yet, after securing a foothold roughly 10 to 15 kilometers east of the canal, Sadat ordered his forces to halt. That controversial choice continues to be debated. Why stop when the advantage seemed clear? A key military reason was the Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile umbrella on the West Bank. Protection from Israeli air power. Advancing farther would have left Egyptian tanks vulnerable to Israeli jets. But military caution was only part of the story. Political objectives played a major role. Sadat's goal may have been to shatter the post-1967 political stalemate and force the superpowers back into negotiations. By digging in east of the canal, Egypt achieved a political and psychological victory without risking total exposure. The pause gave Israel the breathing room to mobilize reserves and prepare a counterstroke. Historians mark the halt as a turning point. Had Egypt pressed on, the outcome might have been different. Instead, Israeli forces eventually crossed to the West Bank, threatening Cairo itself, a momentum reversal born from that strategic pause. As battles raged across Sinai and the Golan, another war was about to begin, fought with barrels of oil. On October 17th, in response to U.S. resupply of Israel, Arab OPEC members made a monumental decision. Led by Saudi Arabia, they announced production cuts and a full embargo on oil exports to key Western supporters. The targets included the United States, the Netherlands, Portugal, and other nations seen as supporting Israel. The impact was immediate. Global oil prices skyrocketed, sending shockwaves through markets. Long lines at pumps, rationing, lower speed limits. The crisis hit daily life and triggered stagnation, and high inflation. Governments scrambled, energy conservation, new investments in nuclear and solar, and new exploration in the North Sea and Alaska. The era of cheap oil was over, and the strategic importance of Middle Eastern oil soared accordingly. The embargo elevated the Gulf's strategic importance and forced Western foreign policy to focus on ensuring the free flow of oil. For the first time, developing nations used control over a commodity to influence the world's leading industrial powers. The oil weapon had been unsheathed, and its consequences would reshape global economics and politics for decades. Out of the oil crisis, a new global financial architecture began to form, one that centered the United States economically. High-level, discreet negotiations with Saudi Arabia led to the birth of the Petrodollar system. OPEC agreed to price and sell oil in US dollars. Any buyer needed dollars to buy essential energy. That arrangement created massive global demand for the dollar and a new anchor for the currency after 1971's end of gold convertibility. Oil-exporting nations accumulated huge surpluses and needed places to invest them. They recycled petrodollars into U.S. treasuries and financial markets, effectively financing American deficits at low cost. The result was a cycle of dependency, oil for dollars for security and investment. In return, the U.S. offered military protection and weapons sales, binding strategic interests across oceans. The petrodollar anchored the dollar's global reserve role and gave the U.S. enduring economic leverage. Countries dependent on oil now had a vital interest in the stability of American finance, a paradoxical reinforcement of U.S. centrality. The financial architecture born from the Yom Kippur War would shape the global economy for decades, an unintended realignment of power. Here lies a fascinating paradox. An action meant to punish the West instead reshaped long-term alliances. The embargo aimed to pressure Western governments to reconsider support for Israel by inflicting economic pain. Yet by pricing oil in dollars and reinvesting in the U.S., oil-producing states tied their fortunes to American financial stability. Their wealth found a home in U.S. banks and treasuries, creating mutual economic dependence. This relationship was codependent but not equal. Oil gave leverage, finance consolidated American strength. It ensured deep U.S. involvement in the region, not just as broker but as guarantor of economic order. The embargo demonstrated Arab political power, but also paved the way for a subtle yet powerful American influence. A weapon meant to punish ended up strengthening the system it sought to challenge. The result was an alliance based more on mutual economic necessity than shared values, a defining feature of late 20th century geopolitics. That unintended alliance reconfigured global relations in ways few had predicted. Viewed from a wider lens, the Yom Kippur War unfolded under the shadow of the Cold War. The Sinai and Golan became proxy battlegrounds where superpower rivalry played out indirectly. Egypt and Syria were armed and advised by the Soviet Union, receiving SAMs, anti-tank weapons, and strategic counsel. Israel, a key U.S. ally, received a massive airlift of tanks, ammunition, and spare parts, a decisive intervention. When Israeli forces encircled the Egyptian Third Army, the Soviets threatened to intervene directly. The U.S. raised its alert status to DEFCON 3, the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world teetered on the brink. This raises a profound question. Were Egypt and Syria masters of their own destiny, or pawns in a larger geopolitical chess match? Did the Soviets encourage action to test U.S. resolve? Did American intervention send its own message of limits to Soviet influence? The war illustrates how regional conflicts could be manipulated and escalated by larger powers pursuing global agendas. For a few tense days, the entire planet held its breath. The Middle East had become a fulcrum of Cold War brinkmanship. Though the guns fell silent in late October 1973, the Yom Kippur War never truly ended. Its echoes shape our world today. On the battlefield, it revolutionized warfare. ATGMs and SAMs forced new doctrines, combined arms tactics, and electronic countermeasures. Economically, the embargo and petrodollar system rewired global finance, linking oil, dollars, and geopolitics in lasting ways. Politically, the war created openings. Egypt regained pride and later negotiated from strength, culminating in Camp David and a peace treaty. That peace came at a cost. Egypt faced regional isolation, and Sadat paid a tragic personal price. The strategic importance of the Gulf and the pattern of economic entanglement with the U.S. trace back directly to 1973. Surprise, survival, intelligence failures, heroic stands, political gambles, and unintended consequences, the Yom Kippur War intertwined the fate of nations, linking a few kilometers of sand to the price of gasoline and the stability of the global financial system. The war is over, but its lessons and consequences remain. Its legacy is a world forever reshaped by the complex interplay of military strategy, intelligence, economic power, and political maneuvering.